Hi, this is Nat Self, aka Zombie Disco Squad. I have Point Blank in the studio with me today. I'm going to be showing a few tips and techniques on making house music, and also giving an overview of a technique that I have for increasing productivity. I've developed a productivity system or an idea, let's say, whereby you create 5 to 10 ideas and spend no more than 1 to 2 hours making each one, and then at the very end you just develop the best ones. I found that what happens quite a lot of the time is that if you're just making music, you get stuck on one idea, and at the end you realize you don't have a track that's very good and you've spent hours making it. So what I'm planning to do is just show you how I make an idea. I've literally just mapped out a few sounds here which I've just picked, and that's it, nothing else. I'm just going to go through and show you my battery kit and the other bits and bobs, and just talk you through beat creation and then making a few other noises. So on the screen right here we have Cubase 7, I'm not at 7.5 yet, and we have battery, which is just loaded up with some bits and bobs, so I'll just play those through to you. So we've got a kick, hi-hat, another hi-hat, clap, another, so on, etc. And then we have some audio bits. One is just Ice Cube going on about how he made a record, which is completely uncut. I just nicked this off YouTube.
So real quick, if you go down to work on the record, and
it just goes on. We've got a hi-hat loop, which comes from Rhineman Collective, which I'm quite fond of. Another one, I have no idea where this comes from. And a little disco hit. And then we have a series of things that I just recorded quickly on my Mini Brute. Just little percussive bits. Also, we have two instances, of Tal Noisemaker. This is one of my favorite synths, and it's actually free. I recommend getting it. And then one of the Tal Uno, which is clearly a Juno. And last but not least, we have Contact. I just randomly opened some bits and bobs from my sample library. So we've got bass noise, strange ethnic kind of noise, flute noise, weird vocal, another weird vocal, something from a jungle sample, cowbell, another cowbell, drum loop. So I tend to start with the drums. I don't think it's that unusual. So I have done nothing to these. So this kick drum, when I was listening to it, was a bit, the envelope on it's not quite right. So if we listen without, I'm just going to trim it up by adding a volume envelope and shortening the decay, and adding to it an effect on battery, which is also available on other things, which is a transient master. So I'm just going to add some attack to it and reduce the stain a bit. It just makes it a bit more crisp in the mix, and means if you add a slightly larger bass line, that the kick will shine through. So we have a kick, simple 4/4 pattern laid out. I'm going to go ahead and add in a hi-hat. Very simple, I don't think I'm changing anyone's world yet. And then a clap, which I'll do a bit more quickly on here. And then I'm going to add a bit of cowbell one. We always need more cowbell. Cubase has got quite a nice function on it, which is it has a MIDI insert which allows you to fluctuate the swing and the groove of it. So if we solo this, it's quite straight at the moment, and I'm going to put quite a lot of swing on it. Yeah, I'm really fond of this because it means that rather than having to change the MIDI pattern, you can change the MIDI signal, which I can't quite explain, but I hope you understand what I mean. Generally speaking, if I built this up, I would then add maybe a top loop. So let's try this one. Just going back to the kick drum, you can hear it's not really pumping enough. I'm going to add a bit of volume to it. And I'm going to add a tiny bit of saturation, which again is built into battery, but you can do elsewhere. Let's try doing some bass. So that's like our basic sort of groove here. And then I'm going to open up one of these noisemakers, and I am going to program a very simple bass noise. So I kind of just want to sub in this case. So if we look, this currently on the default preset has the sub turned up and one oscillator up and the other down. So I'm going to kill this one because I don't want to saw. Put this one's triangle, turn it up, turn the sub off for now. All right, a bit high maybe. Again, this is not that pumpy, so I am going to apply a bit of Cubase's built-in saturation. It's a tape saturator. There are loads of different people that make one of these, but I just use this one because it's easy and it sounds pretty good. So a bit more pumpy. Actually almost kind of a basic house groove at this point. I mean, it's not that far away from a song. I'm going to cut up these vocals and just try and add a bit of like some kind of memorable hook.
Work on the record.
Basically, he's just on about recording a record, but I don't want to use that much of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim most of this, zoom in on this. And I literally just want one syllable or like one word that I can cut and repeat. So I'm going to make this loop much smaller. And then I'm just basically going to scroll through until I find a bit I like.
If you go down to work on the.
I'm not going to use work because it's overused.
Work on the record and.
All right, I quite like that. So that would be the gist of making one idea in this system. I would then go ahead and pattern it out a bit more and export it. I'm going to do it very quickly, but I'm not going to spend too long on it because that will take some time. So yeah, basically here we have, as I said, the sort of the very basic gist of an idea. We also have a bunch of excess stuff in here which I'm going to pull out now, or at least I'm going to hide for the minute. We might come and use it again in a second. So what I would do at this point is I would duplicate it all out a bit, make it around, I don't know, this long, which is about 30 seconds. Yeah. And I would put in a very, very, very basic sort of like, let's say, I would imagine this is a build-up. So I might bang some effects on. Let's say, let's put a dub delay on. They're always fun to play with. So let's use the towel one again, sticking with stuff you can get for free. That's the vocoder, it's not going to do us too much good. Towel dub. This one's kind of fun because what you can do is play with the, you can set it so you can play with the times and create these kind of crazy effects. So I'm going to record this in live. So just hit right. And then I'm just going to automate the dry wet. just so at the end it comes back in, and then open it out. So obviously I took the kick drum out at this point, as I said, just to give like a rough idea what I'm going to do. There we go, we got like a very basic idea. The next song that I'm going to show you, I actually have the idea that it comes from. So as you can see, these are all ideas I've done in the past. So this is the idea I'm about to show you now. This one is actually 2 minutes, so it's a bit of an extended idea. This probably took me about 2 hours to do. Yeah, as I said, this is the limited one. We've got some other here, like this one, for example, is 5 minutes and it's almost a whole song. This would have taken me, yeah, again, like 2 hours. And typically speaking, in, let's say, a month, I would create around, how many we've got here? Probably around 30 of these ideas, and literally only develop the best ones. So moving on, we've got this song that I was just playing with. I use Ableton and Cubase together. So essentially what we have here is we have, start with our drums. So these all come from Battery, apart from some top loops I've taken from sample packs. Let's go for the main section, which would be here. So yeah, I mean, pretty self-explanatory. I mean, I can go through and show you the MIDI, but I think that if you've made any beats, you get the gist. And then on top of that, we've got a weird vocal which I chopped in a similar way to what I just did to Ice Cube. I'm not going to tell you where it comes from, just for the very slight chance that they might suit me, but I've done this and put a delay on it. I'll open it out a bit so you can see what I did to it. So yeah, I just cut that up, and then I've got another battery which is creating a ticking noise with some stuff that comes out of the machine library, I think. So yeah, and some other little bits that just sit in the background. On top of that, I have the Bassline. Now with this bass, I used Contact with a single sample. So I played this, but I wasn't completely happy at the tone. So what I did was I doubled it up. So what I have is one with no chorus. We have another one which is the main one which has got chorus on it. And also some distortion. We've got another one which is barely audible, which is like 1 octave up. Then we've got some ones that are little doubles and reverses, and they pan, so there's these two. And a reverse one that comes in every now and again, barely audible. And finally we have one which is like a resonant one. And together, when they're combined, they make what I hope is a pretty nice bass. On Ableton, we have a few bits and bobs. I tend to do most of my audio on Ableton just because I like the speed of it, and I quite like the built-in effects as well. But I'm not completely wild about their MIDI. I should probably at some point commit to one of the two of them. So this is my Ableton project. So yeah, we've got some little background noises, and they've just got automations on the folders, saturator, etc. And the final product. Like this. The idea, which took me about an hour to develop this, took me probably about another 4 hours, maybe 5. Obviously the difference between this is that it's a 6.5 minute song and is basically ready to be mixed at this point. All of the automations are put in and it's grouped. I mix my tracks in a new project which I'm going to move on to in a second. I don't think there's that much else on here which is particularly extraordinary. I guess the only thing I would say is that don't spend too long on your tracks, because you'll just get bored and then they turn poopy. That's my personal take on it. So yeah, let's move on to the mix. So here we have my mix down. I have the drums, bass, vocal, and all the other bits, the effects, the alarms and stuff, all separated into folders already. It's pretty easy to do this in Cubase. Just select 2 tracks, hit right click, move selected tracks to folder, very simple. I tend to have a master chain. This is not a particularly correct way of doing things, let's say. Mastering engineers don't really like this, and nor would classically trained mixing engineers, but I like it. So my first thing I put in is the glue, the next is Yuhi's Satin, and the third is L2 by Waves. On the glue, I have it on a very slow attack and a fast release, and I have the threshold very low. On Satin, there is a preset I love, which is just called the Sweet Spot. And then finally on L2, I want it barely working at all. So I'm going to go to the loudest point in the track now. And I want the glue barely working at all. So it's just literally like a couple of decibels. Again, on the Satin, I barely want it hitting red, and L2 I want to be compressing by like very little. Basically all of this stuff is pretty much just adding a chain of glue compression, because the glue is just catching the peaks, Satin is then catching a few more peaks and saturating it, and L2 is limiting it slightly. When I'm doing a mix, I tend to start with the kick and the bass. So I've got a kick, I'm going to loop up the section which is pretty much where everything comes in. So we've got our kick and we've got our bass. Now in this case, because as I said earlier, I layered up my basses, I'm going to put all of these to a group channel. So all you do is add group channel, on a stereo one, add track, route them all, should all be rooted, I'll double check, which they are. So then I play the two of them together. Actually, because I put a small amount of sidechain on the bass earlier, they kind of sit together okay. I would say that the bass could come down slightly, and aside from that, it's pretty good. If you're not familiar with sidechain compression, there's a gazillion tutorials about it online. The only other thing that I would say for bass is that it's quite important not to have your bass frequency clashing with your kick frequency. So if we look at the bass, I want kind of the majority of the frequency to be coming through around 100 down, and I want the biggest point at approximately 80. If we look at the kick, I want it to have a notch around sort of 100 and something, just so that they both come through. Generally when I'm mixing, after I've done the bass and the kick, I will go on to add the rest of the drums. So in this case a hat. I always check that there's no excess on the lower frequencies coming through. The way I tend to think about a mix is that you have a box and everything has to fit in the box, so that the hi-hat's purpose is to fill a certain point in this frequency spectrum, in this case, whatever it is, let's see, between 1,000 and 20,000. So just this has no play, like there's no purpose in this having any frequency below that. So if in one of them, which we'll probably find, let's have a look. Right, so here we go. We've got a snare. It's got tons of stuff going on the low end. That's filling up our box. So I'm going to trim that up. This is the high pass filter. And it's just clearing space for other things to shine through and for it all to compress. So this is actually a back snare here, so I'm going to turn it right down. I tend to make quite a few doubles of claps and snares, so I will mix these together so that I'm aware of each one and that they complement each other. You can hear these are quite like big. They've got a slight track delay on one, so they're hitting at very slightly points. Very slightly different points. Again, I'll just trim up any excess lower frequencies on both of them. And just to like make a nice stereo image, I'll pull one like slightly to the left and one slightly to the right. So claps, hats, this stuff's pretty like background. We've got an open hat. Once again, it's got loads of rubbish on the bottom end, that's pretty common. This one, I'm going to add a bit of saturation. So this is our clock tick. This is actually kind of like this runs throughout the track. I do want to keep a bit of the low end in this because it's quite a key element to the song. I also think it sounds slightly dry, so I'm going to add a very small reverb to it just to bring it out a little bit. Like really like the wetness, which is the mix set at 2%, and a smaller reverb time, and I might add a very small ping pong delay as well, just again to add like, I think of it kind of as seasoning. It's like barely there, but it does make a bit of a difference. So I'm going to set it to a 16th, and yeah, there we go. So get another shake. Let's see how we're getting on here. That's fine. These are live drums that come in later. Trim up the bottom end again. Okay, I won't spend too much longer on these drums. So let's see how the drums and the bass is sitting together now. Yeah, pretty well. I mean, I tend to, when I'm making my tracks, I tend to mix them to some extent as I go. A tip for getting your tracks to sound as loud as possible, in my opinion, is to find elements that fit well together rather than trying to fix it in the mix. I've actually had a few complaints recently that my tracks sound a bit too loud, which I took as a compliment. Some people might take that as an insult. It depends. Dynamically, my tracks are normally still there. They're not squashed like a lot of like the more EDM electro stuff is, but they are very loud. So we have our bass and our drums. I mean, this is only a rough mix because I don't want to bore you guys with this for too long. The only thing I am going to change here is this drum break, which I cut up, which I feel is again quite a key element. So I'm going to really bring it out by saturating it and EQ it a bit. So I really want it to pump through. Actually going to leave most of the bottom end in this one. I'm just going to trim up below 30 hertz, which is pretty serious sub bass. And then the only last things to do, I guess, are to check the vocals come through. Again, these are two separate bits, so I'm going to put them to their own group. They're two separate channels which are the same element. So in this case, it is the two vocals. So some time and time. Send both of these to group 2. So then this is our vocal, and I'm going to put a small delay and reverb on it again. Once again, I see this as seasoning, so probably very small. Let's say 2% coming through. Open the higher and a little ping pong delay with a 16th delay, and let's say 5. Help if they were not muted.
Sometime.
So that's with the effect.
Sometime.
So the difference is subtle, but it makes me happy. Yep, so the vocal has now got a little bit of effect on it. Our bass is all on the right frequency and is coming through correctly. There's some little extras here which we will just double check are okay, but just as I said, generally speaking, I am making sure these levels are roughly okay as I go. So in the background we've got a little tape thing. It's kind of just needs to be quiet anyway. The main thing I want to check here is this very piercing alarm noise. That will have the ability to really hurt people's ears if it comes through on the wrong frequency too much. Around 1.5 is a frequency that's for some reason just really sets people like it puts their teeth on edge. So I tend to cut really piercing noises around there with a very, very small EQ dip, but I just find that otherwise they're a bit piercing. There's another noise in here which is the main alarm. Again, this, like, if it's too loud and has the wrong frequencies too prominent, will just get people's ears bleeding. So if we just play it again, I'm just going to put a bit of a cut around 1.5. This one appears on its own, and what will happen in mastering is it won't be that loud compared to the rest of the song now, but when there is the final compression and limiting done at the mastering stage, that will come right up. So I'll leave it quite far down in the mix, or not quite far down, but comparatively quite far down to other things. And that is about it. All I do at this point is go and just check that my outputs are good, and I'm not. So the glue, maybe 1 or 2, that's fine. Satin, yeah, plenty of headroom there. L2 barely doing, barely moving. Now this is kind of obviously a bit of a quick go at mixing. If I was spending more time, I would do more things, like, for example, I would go through on my kick and I might add a second layer of distortion, or on my snare drum I might add a little dub delay that went in the background, and so on and so forth. Add 16ths of delay to bits and bobs and reverbs to bits and things. I haven't gone through all of these channels and made sure they're EQ'd, which is another thing I do. But otherwise, that's kind of the gist of my mixing. The key point I would say is just to always, if you want to make your stuff really bang, don't fill it. Like, leave space in there and allow the compression at the end to do the work. So like, don't fill that whole frequency and then expect it to sound really loud. It won't. When you compress it at the end, it's just going to sound like a mess. And also, just to recap my system for making tracks, just in case you'd forgotten from the beginning. So the gist is to make around 10 ideas of approximately 30 seconds each, and then develop really only the best ones. So no more than sort of 3 or 4 out of 10 in my case. If you're lucky, you might get more than that. If you're unlucky, you might get half or 1. I think that it is really, for me, the best way of doing it. Some people do like to spend a long time on one track, but I found that what happens is you get too bogged down in the details and then end up with a product that might not be perfect. I hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial. Just to plug myself a little bit, SoundCloud Zombie Disco Squad, Twitter @Zombie Disco, Facebook Zombie Disco Squad. If you have any questions, @ me on Twitter is probably the best, and I'll do my best to reply to them. Thank you very much. Bye bye.